Hi, this is Heather DeRome from heatherderome.ca and from the Sonatas and Partitas.com. This video is an introduction to a whole series of videos that I'm actually really excited about making, because we're going to take a real inside look at the work that Frank Koonce and I did when we were making our arrangements of the Sonatas and Partitas and the cello suites. Now, the first question to ask yourself always in this type of situation is whether you're working with a transcription or an arrangement. Now, a transcription would be like Frank's editions of Bach's flute suites, where he occasionally had to change an octave of a bass note or something like that. But essentially, it was exactly the same. But when you're dealing with two instruments that are as different as the violin and the guitar, you actually run into thousands, literally, of discussions that lead you to decide to make a change. You'll either add in a note, or maybe at times we'll take out a note, or sometimes Bach actually has a very deliberate effect that you can do with a bow, but you can't do on a guitar. So you have to make changes. And that is what these videos are going to discuss. Now, the first thing that Frank and I did was we educated ourselves by actually studying Bach's own transcriptions. He made transcriptions of Vivaldi's work and of his own work. One of my favorite examples is comparing the third partita with our fourth flute suite, and also cantata BWV 29. Here's the bourrée. And here's John Williams playing it on the guitar. I chose John Williams because I love how he plays those bass notes. On the other hand, here's a sarabande from the A minor lute suite. And here it is on cello. And you can hear that even though it's very sparse on the cello, Bach kept it essentially the same. He added bass notes at the cadences. And also, compare his arrangement of Vivaldi to Vivaldi's original. And here's Bach's. He essentially made it the same as Vivaldi's, only making changes as necessary for his new medium. Now, what Bach said about that work was that it taught him to think musically. And honestly, having done that work myself with Frank Koonce, I really think that there is nothing that taught us so much about the music of Bach as actually trying to take it from one instrument and moving it to a completely different instrument, just like Bach did when he was taking a full orchestral piece and putting it on the harpsichord. You run into questions, you run into dead ends, you have to make decisions, and it actually forces you to look directly at the music, at what the composer was thinking, combined with the technique of the two instruments. Now, another thing that was really important for us in our work can be highlighted by just looking at the cover of these two editions. Busoni, Bach, Chacon, Segovia, studies by Fernando Sor. We did not want our edition to be Bach, Koonce, DeRome. We really wanted it to just sound like Bach. And so again, we educated ourselves. For starters, just looking at the tuning of the violin, that gave us tremendous insight insofar as to how Bach might have been constricted. For example, just look at this passage of the Chacon. We can see 3-note chords and 4-note chords. Coming from an era of counterpoint and voice leading, we must ask ourselves why. Well, similar to the guitar, if we have an E chord, we'll tend to strum across 6 strings, and if it's an A chord, we'll strum 5. If our melody line goes below E, we play it on the B string. But also on the violin, sometimes this caused an inner voice to have to be omitted because it landed on the same string as another note. But since the guitar is tuned in fourths, we could fit that note on the guitar. And so we need to decide if adding in that other note is a good idea. And if so, then we need to be sure we're adding the correct note. Because here, for example, that correct note could be B flat or C. So you need to do a little digging. And on the other hand, the passage also shows how Bach really made use of his limitations of the instrument to make the music stronger. Because most of the time, where there are only 3-note chords, the music wants to be a little more quiet. So at least when Frank and I were arranging this, we didn't just go ahead and change the whole passage to 4 voices. And then, not only learning about the physical properties of violin, but actually learning about how playing techniques differed then from now. That also gave us insight into how Bach may have been thinking. And theory. Nowadays, we tend to be quite well versed in harmony, but not so much in counterpoint. And there's a really interesting quote by C.P.E. Bach when he said that his father knew harmony better than any other composer. Now, the thing that I find interesting about that is that he doesn't mention counterpoint. But the fact is that Bach was trained in counterpoint. He was trained to think in figured bass, intervals above the bass line, the famous then but not so famous now rule of the octave. And what's becoming better known now through Robert Yerdingen's work is how composers used schemata, like little modules or little formulas that were used like building blocks, and they were either lined up one after another or stacked on top of each other. And that's how composers compose so fast. They weren't writing one note at a time. Now, just for a quick example, let's have a look at this old score of mine. We can see near the end that my teacher penned in his characteristic handwriting, he put in a low E in the bass. Now, according to our training in harmony, that low E is not a wrong note, it's just a dominant. But according to this little formula that Bach was using, that low E is superimposed on it and it doesn't belong in it. Now, the way that this particular formula works, Robert Yerdingen called it the quiescenza, and I think it's a great name for it because it is quintessential to the music of that time and even the music after that time, and really up through the classical and even in the Romantic period, this formula was used. And the way it's used is you arrive at your home chord a bit before the end, and then on a tonic pedal, so there's no dominant notes in it, you have the flattened leading tone, so here it was G, and then the 6th scale degree, and then you have the leading tone, but it comes in a different voice usually. So here we were at the upper voice, now we're going to go in the middle voice for the G sharp, and then back to the tonic chord. And then you could have the leading tone put back into its original voice, and the close. And so all this happens over a tonic pedal. The point of it is a tonic pedal. And, you know, if you don't know that, it would be easy to just put in a dominant, because why not? Now, I particularly like this example because I think it really highlights what I was saying about C.P.E. Bach's comment, talking about his father being so good at harmony, but the comment just taking for granted everything about counterpoint and the rule of the octave and the use of those schemata. Like, for us, adding in that low E, we would never think of it as being a wrong note. It fits in with our harmony, it fits in with our sense of 1-4-5, and why not put a dominant at the end? But it doesn't fit in with that little world. It's kind of analogous to our fairy tales. We all know fairy tales really well, and we know that we can have a fairy tale with a princess and a fairy godmother, and there's another type of fairy tale of little children lost in the woods, like Little Red Riding Hood or Hansel and Gretel. Like in those fairy tales, it might make sense for a woodcutter to come in. Even if a woodcutter doesn't come into Hansel and Gretel, like some of the versions he does. But it would never make sense to throw a fairy godmother into one of those fairy tales. And in the same way, it wouldn't make sense for a woodcutter to come up to Cinderella and help her get to the ball. Like, we know the little players in our stories, and that is something that is really getting to be more known now. That was really interesting in our work. And one of the reasons why I'm just excited about making these videos and showing how this can all tie into when we make an arrangement, when we want to make a change to it. So if you want to find out when the other videos are uploaded, you can subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications. You can also go to our website. There are lots of articles and more videos there. You can subscribe to a non-promotional newsletter. It's all at sonatasandpartitas.com.